Hey, hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. I'm delighted to introduce you or reacquaint you to the wonderful world of metal cold casting and effects. Today, I'm going to be showing you a whole bunch of materials and techniques that are going to help make it faster, easier, and cheaper for you to create real metal effects for your castings and parts. Today, I'm joined by two of my colleagues. I've got Alex Hazard over here. He's manning our audio and video. And I also have my colleague, Jeffrey Purdon, who's going to be our chat moderator. So if you guys want to make a comment, you want to ask a question, or just say hello, feel free to do that in the chat. He and his team are going to follow that. And if there's a question that makes sense to ask me live, you might just get your question asked right here, and I can answer it right away. Otherwise, if you have other questions that can't be answered in the chat as we go, feel free to give us a call back on our toll-free tech support line, and we can help you out there, or send an email to one of our tech support emails, and we will definitely help you out. So let me go ahead and just get into what we're going to learn today. So we're going to learn about metal cold casting and why you would want to do it, like what type of applications. We're also going to learn about some of the differences between traditional foundry casting and metal cold casting, like cost advantages. We're going to learn about what materials are commonly used and what techniques are commonly used for metal cold casting. We're also going to learn about how to make them using alternative materials and techniques that you may not have thought of. Also, I'm going to throw in some best practices, tips, and tricks. Plus, at the end, we're going to talk about backfill and post-finishing options. So some of the materials we're going to cover today are our real metal powders, our bronze, brass, copper, aluminum, and nickel silver. Some of the other materials are going to be our smooth cast onyx, deep black urethane casting resin, our smooth cast 325, clear amber urethane casting resin, our So Strong and UVO urethane color tints, and also epoxy color tint, our XTC-3D brushable epoxy coating, our freeform air lightweight epoxy putty, our Foamit ridge expanding urethane foams, our URE-FIL 17 small grain aluminum pellet filler, and finally our Matrix Drive and Neo, which are polymer modified gypsums. So just to kind of get you a little bit of history, I mean, metal casting's been around for over 5,000 years. Traditionally, this would be done in a foundry, and I'm going to simplify it a little bit, but you'd basically have molten liquid metal that you would put into a specially prepared mold. It can be complex, and there's a lot of steps that go before that part and go after that part to get a metal casting. You've probably seen them anywhere, honestly. Maybe you're walking down the street and you see a placard on a building that's commemorating something that's noteworthy. You might have seen a bronze statue at a museum or somewhere as you've been walking somewhere. You might even see a metal door knocker. It can be big, small, whatever it is. Many, many things are made in a foundry. To contrast, you know, the hot metal that you have to somehow, like, at high temperatures melt down and deal with, we're going to talk about metal cold casting. The cold casting is cold because we're not melting any hot liquid metal down. It's more of a 20th century innovation. So at its core, metal cold casting is basically a process that's going to combine fine metal powder, and it's going to combine it with a binding agent, or something like a liquid medium that it's going to mix with, something like a urethane resin, an epoxy resin, maybe even a polymer modified gypsum. I have a couple things that I'm going to show you just so you can see your possibilities. That mixture is going to be basically a composite, and that composite is going to remarkably simulate the look, feel, and even the weight of solid metal. All of the stuff that I'm going to show you that's on this table over here, these are made with some variation of a metal cold casting process. It's kind of hard to tell, right? Like, was that made in a foundry? Was that made in my basement? You don't really know. I'll give you some examples of why someone might decide to make a metal cold casting other than it's really cool. Something simple, people like to commemorate something. It might be maybe like I ran like a 5K and I want to make either a coin or maybe a medal. So something like this. It actually, you can hear it, it's cold. It feels just like metal because there is metal in this. So when you touch it, you kind of are like, wait, was that made in a foundry, or was this made with the metal cold casting process? Another thing you might make is maybe you want to decorate your house. Maybe you want to make it unique, customize it. This is an outlet cover. You tired of those plastic boring outlet covers? Why don't you jazz it up? You can make something like this. You could also make fixtures out of it if you wanted to, doorknobs, things like that. What if you're working on a project where you're into cosplay? Or maybe you're a reenactor, a historical reenactor. You may want to use a real metal piece for some type of armor. It could be an emblem, something like that. So you can make real metal things as part of your costume or cosplay, depending on what you want to do. We all know about different things like plaques, statues, even signs like this. These are things that you might see on the side of the building, or you might see it in your home office, or even at your workplace. It is hard to tell whether that was actually a cast piece of molten metal, or it was a metal cold casting. It is deceptively hard to tell. And we're going to show you how to do that today. If you look back here, I have some pieces that are made by my colleague Milo. He's done a lot of videos on our website that you can reference to show how to actually sculpt these using our Chavant clays and do some of these castings. So that's a really good resource if you want to get into how do I make my original piece or things like that. Those are some really cool things. You might even, depending on what you want to do, you might even want to do something seasonal. Since Halloween's coming up, I'll show you these little skull guys, which are really cute, these were made and sculpted again with the Chavant clays by my colleague, Nikki. She let me borrow the mold, and these are really cool skull pieces. Now, I know for certain she has these hanging up in her house. So maybe you want to be a reseller of different products, and you can actually save a little bit of money, make real metal castings, and basically you have different options for different seasons or things like that. But just so that you know, this is just another thing that you could do. So when you're looking at whether this was made with real metal foundry or metal cold casting, that's something why we're going to focus on that today, is to show you how you can do that yourself. I want to just give you a little bit of a compare-contrast just so you understand the differences between traditional foundry castings and some of the advantages of our metal cold castings. Let me go ahead and pull up this chart real quick. So on this chart, I'm going to basically show you a little bit about the metal cold casting and a little bit about the traditional foundry. Again, hot versus cold, right? So when you're looking at metal cold casting, I would say the number one thing why people want to go this route is cost savings. You're going to save a ton of money versus the expensive foundry hot metal castings. They both are amazing and look great. It just depends on what you want to do. To me, I like to do the cost savings part because I can't afford something like a big foundry casting, but that's probably the number one thing. Second is probably the time. This is so much faster. In the time that I'm going to have this little class with you, we're going to make so many things. That would barely get you started with the foundry casting. There's a lot of work that goes on before they even make the casting and after the casting. And so you will save a lot of time doing the metal cold casting. The other thing is that, honestly, almost anyone can do it. If I can do it, you can do it. That's what I always say. You do need specific training and expertise in order to do the foundry casting. Plus, it's done at a foundry. The other one you can do at your home workshop, things like that. It's much easier to do, definitely less complex than some of the other techniques like lost wax you may have heard of, investment, sand casting. There's so many different ways you can do it. But definitely ours is, I would say, much easier to do. It's also versatile compared to the foundry casting. Depending on what you want to do, you may want to mimic the weight of heavy metal, but you actually have the option of making it even lighter in weight. And there's a lot of reasons you might do that. You might be in theater, and maybe you don't need to lug around this heavy metal thing. So having the option to make something lightweight can also save you money depending on the materials. The other difference is, okay, so it's not 100% metal, we get it, compared to real solid metal, but that's okay because we can definitely simulate the look, feel, and touch of the look, feel, and weight, if we want to, of real metal. So now that you know a little bit about some of the differences between the two of them, it's up to you to decide which route you want to go. But for me and my focus today, I'm going to teach you how to do the metal cold castings. My goal is that at the end, you're going to feel confident so that you can do this on your own. If not, like I said earlier, just give us a call and we'll help you out with your specific project. So you are going to need a couple things to get started. As I do each demo, I'm going to go into each one just so that you know what materials that I'm using. The other things that you're going to need that you'll see me use throughout the demo is you want vinyl gloves. You are going to be working with metal powders, so you may want to use a dust mask. This is an N95 mask. The powders can poof up, and then when we burnish things to bring out the shine, you're going to get a little bit of plastic residue, like dust and maybe some metal dust. Nobody wants to breathe that. So you have this. You also want to work in like a big space, right? You want room-size ventilation. I'm in a big studio right here with good ventilation. Don't do this in a closet or somewhere where there's no air circulation. Keep that in mind. You can also take a look at some of our like technical bulletins, our SDS, safety data sheets, so you are informed for what you're doing. But let's just talk about the stars of the show, which are going to be our dry metal powders. So these are the sizes they're sold in, and I wanted to show you what they look like in their dry form before we mix them into anything. So here they are. This is brass. This is bronze. This is nickel silver. This is copper. And this is aluminum. So these over here, these are -325 mesh. This guy over here, this aluminum, he's -200 mesh. What those are the ideal particle size for you to get really, really believable metal cold castings. You want to use a very fine powder specifically designed for that, and that's what Smooth On offers, these 5 options for you. So make sure, depending on what you want to do, you decide ahead of time, which one do I want to use? Some people will combine them, and that's okay. Like if you wanted to mix a couple ones that are similar, that's okay. But again, experiment, do some small scale tests, figure out where you want to go. So I think it's time for us to get started into our demos. So let me go ahead and move some of this out of the way to make some space for that. All right, so the first thing I'm going to show you is what we call our gel coat. And the gel coat is basically, to me, probably 99% of the time is what you are going to use in order to do your metal cold casting. There's a lot of different techniques that I'm going to show you, but I would say this is like the go-to, like whenever I do it, this is probably my #1, and I think will be your #1. So let me just pull this over here. Try not to make a huge mess. So I have here a silicone mold, right? This is actually our MoldStar 16 Fast. So when you look at the MoldStar 16 Fast online, you're going to see a lot of different MoldStar options. This is just one that I particularly love to use. It's really versatile, and actually it is reusable. So once you make one casting, you don't like it, that's okay, make another one. That's the beauty of these silicone molds. So the stuff that you see here that I brought out to you are what we're going to use today. I decided for this one, I'm going to use Smoothcast 325, one of the most common products that you're going to use in order to do the metal cold castings. And I'm going to use our brass powder. So the 325, what is it? This is a clear amber urethane resin. So when you look at it, it looks pretty clear. It takes color really, really well. We call it our color match series because if you were to add colorants, they would look really, really good, and you would see them through it. It is clear. So I'm going to use our So Strong. This is a urethane colorant system. I'm going to use yellow, and I'm going to use brown. Take a look at the brass. It's kind of yellow and brown, right? So that's why I'm going to use the yellow and brown colorant. What I'm going to do is I want to try to mimic some of that color. You don't have to, but I like to do that. I think that really helps bring out the color of the natural brass color, and I think it'll look really, really good. You don't have to, but it does look good, and I can give you some other reasons as we go along. So when I talked about the gel coat, you might have heard someone call it also like, I would say like a face coat. That might be another thing that people call it. But the gel coat is basically a very thin layer. You can actually do a second layer if maybe you had bald spots or something like that. But when you brush it in, you'll be able to see why this is a much more affordable way to do castings to get that metal effect. So here's what I'm going to do. There's a couple ways. I'm going to do my part A and my part B, and then I'm going to add my powder. You will sometimes see people add part B, say, and then they add the metal powder in. You can do that. I usually like to do my A and my B because it's together first, because it gives me a little bit more liquid to mix the powder in. The powder is actually going to thicken it up quite a bit, and so I don't want it that thick. So that's why having two of them together helps. I put a little bit of the brown. I put a little bit of the yellow. I want this to be a little more yellow, so I'm going to add just a little bit more yellow there. I'll keep these to the side here. And I'm going to first put my part B in. So now no time has started, right? The pot life has not started. For this particular product, you actually have about 2.5 minutes pot life. Doesn't sound like a lot, does it? It's actually enough for you to get started, and you'll be okay with it. Just keep it in mind. If you're a little bit worried that maybe that you aren't going to hit that mark, I sometimes put my phone up and I'll put a timer if I'm worried about my timing or I'm not experienced with the product. So all I'm doing now is mixing my colorant in so that it's in there before, and it saves me time, right? I haven't started any time. Once I put my part A with the part B, the clock starts ticking. So I'm going to dump that in, get all of that out, scrape the sides and the bottoms. I'm going to throw this out here, and I'm going to also mix my powder in. So this is where I dump it in. The mix ratio for doing the metal cold castings is 1 part A to 1 part B by volume for the resin, and then 1 part by volume of the metal powder. You will see people try to do less than 1 part. It's not that it can't be done, it's just that now you have less metal to achieve that metal look. Sometimes it doesn't look as shiny or as good, so start at the minimum of 1. I have seen people then also go up. Maybe they want to do 1.5 part. 2 seems kind of high because it is going to get thicker, but you can do 1 to 1.5 part, or maybe like a rounded part, and you'll be okay. So I'm trying to mix slowly because I don't want to splash it. And the metal powder is heavy, right? So the metal powder is sinking down. So I'm trying to incorporate all of it together. I can feel the sides of this. There's an exotherm that's produced when this material is combined in your A and B. The exotherm is what's needed, other than measuring it properly and mixing it properly. It's what's needed to help it actually cure. And so I can feel like it's going to start happening. So I'm going to throw this in here gently. I'm going to scrape as much of it out as I can. And now with my stir stick, or excuse me, with my brush, I'm going to do the gel coat. You're going to see me move this constantly. I'm going to keep moving this as we talk, and I'm going to try to make an even coating on all sides, even the edges. I actually even like to go a little over the edge. You can see a lot of people who make some mistakes with it because they dump it in and walk away, or maybe they brush it in, and after they brush it in, they're like, okay, I'm done. But you want to keep this moving. You don't want to just brush it in and walk away. You want to keep it moving on all edges. Hopefully I'm going to get all of them as we're talking. And like I said, I don't mind going over the edge a little because then I know I got up to the top. Sometimes it looks fake if you missed part of it, and when you burnish it, it just does not look real because you see the resin through it. That's another reason why I like to color the resin, is because it kind of conceals any mistakes. It's a little bit of backup. So when you're mixing this normally and you pour it in a mass, say into a mold, the Smoothcast 325 is going to give you about a 2.5 minute pot life, maybe a 10-minute cure. Because we don't have a lot, we call that low mass. So the lower mass actually takes a little bit longer time to set up. So I'm going to just keep brushing and keep brushing, because now that I've reduced the mass, it also is going to take longer. Sometimes I've noticed the metal powder can slow the cure a little bit, but hopefully as I'm going along, you can see that I've been keeping this moving because metal powder's heavy, wants to sink to the bottom. I don't want to let it have that opportunity, so I'm going to keep moving so that I distribute this powder evenly. As we go, I think you can start to see, I can feel it a little bit as I'm brushing. It's starting to pull a little bit. As it starts to pull, you're going to want to be careful, and it's almost like you feel at a certain point like, okay, I need to stop, because if you keep going, you might disturb what you just put down, which you don't want to do. So as you can see, it's slowing down. You see it kind of getting thicker, even more thicker, because it's starting to set up. This is where I would set it aside and I would let this cure on its own. And let it partially cure. Maybe it might take 30 minutes or so, or longer, depending. If I wanted to check it to make sure it was cured, I could check on the outside where I brushed, or I could keep my mixing container or my brush, and I could touch that brush so that I'm not disturbing any of the stuff that I just put down. So I'm going to throw this out, and I'm going to show you what we would do to complete this. So let's flash forward, pretend we let this set up fully, and I'm going to show you where we go next. So next, we are going to be right here. Magically, I've let this set up, and it's fully, I can touch it. Nothing's coming off of my hand. So now it's ready for me to do what we call our backfill. So with the backfill, again, I'm going to add some colorant. I do not want to just put clear. I mean, I guess if you could, if you wanted to, it's not like it's not going to set up. But by disguising it or like adding that colorant, it gives you more of that illusion of that solid metal piece. Also, like I said, if it accidentally were to drop or something, you wouldn't just see like plain old resin. You would see a little bit of something that matches the bronze and kind of give you a little edge there. So I have my A and my B here, and I have a little bit of that brown and a little bit of that yellow still that I kept out. I'm going to be using those, again, to kind of match this color. So I have A and B. I'm going to add my color again to my B, a little bit of brown, and a little bit of yellow, a little more yellow, I think, than brown. The cool thing that's interesting about the Smoothcast 325 and adding these color tints is the 325, like I had said, is actually clear, like a clear amber. So technically, if I were to add a little bit more color versus a little less color, I might get different outcomes. So I can actually, if I wanted to add it to be more brown or more black, it will take that color that I added, or I mean, you could technically do red or purple. I mean, you could go nuts and make it really, really unique. There's a lot of people who make very interesting metal cold castings. I'm just trying to do more of the traditional so you could see what's going on. So no timing has started. I'm going to add my part A. So B, I kind of just pre-mix some of the colorant just to make sure it's all in there. Now my time starts when these touch. The thing too about when you're using the dry powders, you know, did you notice I didn't add any powder here? That is a huge cost savings. This doesn't need to be solid metal. No one is seeing this powder that's in here. The only thing people are seeing is what's on the outside, and that's where your money is, on the outside. That's where you get one of the huge, huge cost savings. The plastic has a certain weight to it. It does feel somewhat realistic. And later we're going to talk about ways that you can even add a little bit more weight to really simulate that real metal feel if you want to. And again, those are just options. Sometimes people don't really care if it 100% like metal because maybe they're just sitting it on their desk and no one's touching it or hanging it on a wall, or for other, you know, depending on what you're doing. Maybe it's in a museum, no one's touching it, so maybe they don't need it to be super heavy. Again, I'm mixing, I'm scraping the sides and the bottom. Those are always our good practices to make sure you have a thorough mix. You have about, again, 2.5 minutes here, and I can feel it getting warm. So I'm gonna go ahead and pour, and this will bond to that surface. And so now nobody's gonna know that this is a casting, hopefully, because the outside is gonna be that composite of real metal brass, and then it's gonna also have a little bit of resin holding it together. Some of these bubbles up here, I like to use a little torch here, and you're not burning it, you're kind of near it, and you're poofing it to get rid of any bubbles. Bubbles can happen not just from atmospheric, like humidity. Bubbles can actually happen because maybe your dry powder, like any dry powder, can absorb atmospheric humidity. So really be careful if you need to bake it out at a low temp. Maybe if you notice that you have a high humidity, you want to bake out your powders. If you notice that there's bubbling or foaming that's not related to other causes, that you can definitely tell there's a moisture reaction. These urethanes are moisture reactive. Then you want to make sure you bake out your powders. The metal powders, you might be thinking they're metal, but they're still dry and they can absorb things, so that'll help you out. So now that I feel like I got all my bubbles out, I wait for this to set up, and I should be good to go. I'm gonna show you what that looks like. I'll just put this here, but I'm gonna show you what that looks like in the end so that you can see what would happen when we demold that. So I have some examples to show you. And so now let's say we flash forward, maybe we made 30 minutes or so, and we're gonna demold. What do we see? We see this guy here. Not super exciting, right, guys? I mean, it's kind of dull, kind of sad. It's not crazy nice. You got to put a little work into this, right? So we would need to burnish this. After my next demo, I'm going to show you some burnishing. But after you polish or burnish this, you're going to be able to get something more along the lines of this. So if you notice here, this one's shiny, trying to get it in our little studio lights. This one is the burnished one versus the dull one that just came out. If you have a mold that's shiny or glossy, or you have a mold that's matte or dull, that's going to be reflected in your casting. So keep that in mind when you're selecting your pieces. So remember we were talking about how you could add a little bit more color, like do I want more yellow, do I want more brown? I just want to show you this because I did this one and I added extra brown. This is still the same metal powder. This is still brass, but I added more brown. So I just want to show you, like, you can actually change up the outcome, like just based on your color decision, something as simple as that. So same brass powder, this looks more like what people would consider brass, but this is actually also the same thing, only I added more brown, just to show you where you can take this.
Hi, Heather. Real quick, I do have a question from chat.
What's up, Jeff?
Throw over to you because I don't know the answer. No, I do. If you wanted like a silicone, a flexible, like an EcoFlex, say, to have metal appearance, would you use the real metal powder, do the cold casting like we're demonstrating here?
So the question is, if you wanted to have a flexible thing, like a silicone rubber, have a metallic look. I probably wouldn't use our metallic powders. They tend to work better in something rigid. Think of them as little fine powder granules, right? They're really fine, but they're still powder. Most of the time, I would refer someone to use our Cast Magic. The Cast Magic can give you some metallic appearances, and they could still be flexible, and they encapsulate just a little bit better in the silicones. If you wanted to try to do this, I guess you could. We always say, hey, there's always possibilities that you can come up with, but if it were me, I would probably recommend the Cast Magic. I feel like those bond a little bit better in there. Again, totally up to you, but that's my opinion on it. If you decided to put this into something that wasn't rigid, like we're talking about even a flexible foam, I still would recommend more of a rigid piece, unless you're just only gonna like maybe barely move it. But usually when people pick something like silicone, they wanna like stretch it and go crazy. So I might choose something more of like our Cast Magic system. Those look metallic. You know, you can get colorful metallics and all that. I actually did a YouTube live on those, and there's a lot of videos on our website. So if you wanna check those out, that might be a good idea to get started on. Hope that answered the question. So the next thing I wanted to show you before I move forward is that you do not have to use urethane resin. You can actually use a polymer modified gypsum. This one right here is our Duomatrix Neo. We also have Duomatrix Drive. They're polymer modified gypsums. Look how cool this looks. So you hear that? I don't know if you can hear that. Let me put it to my mic. This is actually a gypsum, a polymer modified gypsum, and the polymer modified part means it's super strong and awesome. This particular formulation in the matrix also has our highest flame rating. So this is actually suitable for public space use if you do desire that type of rating, which is really interesting. Depending on where you want to go with it, and if you want to learn how to do this type of metal cold casting with a polymer modified gypsum, just check out my colleague Janessa Portner's YouTube live where she covers that and shows you exactly how. So let me move forward to the next most common type of application. So I showed you the #1 most common, which is the gel coat technique. This one is what I would call like the dusting technique. I almost would even say that this is, I would say, intermediate to advanced. Not because you can't do it or it's that difficult, but because more can go wrong with it. It is definitely an option, and you can actually even save even more money because you're going to be using even less material. But I wanted to show you this particular technique because it's viable. I know a lot of people that do it. I've done it myself when I'm in a pinch and I'm in a hurry because it's relatively quick. I also want to show you another material that's extremely popular for making metal cold castings, and it's called Smooth Cast Onyx. There's 2 of them that we offer. I'm talking about Onyx Fast today. We have Fast and Slow, and that refers to the pot life and cure time. So you saw me use these colorants before. Not this time. Onyx Black is black. So you don't have to add any colorant to it. I mean, I guess I could add white if I wanted it to be gray, but I'm not trying to go there. Notice this is like super black. So this actually already has the colorant in it. You don't have to buy a separate colorant. I also have this powder here. It's a little bit of nickel silver. I personally think nickel silver looks really nice black. Some people like black with bronze and other things. It just depends on you. But to me, this is my favorite, so I'm going to show you that. What I'm going to do is show you how to dust it in. It's pretty simple. And it doesn't take much time or skill, really, but you just take a little bit of the powder. You noticed before it was a mix ratio of 1A to 1B, right? And then 1 by volume of powder. Imagine I had a whole other thing of powder here. That's a lot, right? I'm not really going to use much. I'm going to throw this in here. I'm going to try to coat the surface. Cool thing about these silicone molds, they have a little bit of surface tension. And the hope is that it's going to like have it cling, right? You want this powder to cling. I'm going to brush it around. I'm going to try to coat every surface. The reason that I say that this is more to like an intermediate to advanced technique is because more can go wrong in this part especially. If you don't dust it right, you leave too much in the crevices. You don't get all the way to the edges. It's really easy for it to look totally terrible. Also, when you start buffing this and polishing it, you know, with our burnishing tools, like our steel wool that I'm going to show you, it's so thin, you can just buff right through it, and then all of a sudden you're at the plastic. So you kind of have to keep in mind, I got to go a little bit more gingerly with how I'm doing this because I don't want it to have issues. So I didn't get my edges yet. I have this little piece of paper here as my little buffer. I'm going to go around the edges. And the other reason that I have this paper here is because I am cost conscious. So I'm not going to just like dump out this metal powder. I want you to be able to save this powder, put it back into your container, and then you could reuse it again. So, I mean, you could throw it out, but you're throwing out money. So this is a good way that I always have a little bit of brown paper around to catch all my extras. I can dump it out. And then what I'm making sure of is that I coated everything. Hopefully I got it all, guys. And that I don't have like clumps anywhere. I will show you after this demo what it looks like if you do it incorrectly. So interestingly enough, I actually don't have to do a gel coat. I'm basically doing what you would consider, I guess, the backfill. And I'm going to show you that using a technique where I pour it onto a stick. If you pour it onto just the mold itself, there's a tendency that it wants to kind of like go like this and kind of splash a little. And so you might get some bald spots where it hits. So pouring it onto this stick just softens the blow a little bit. And I'm going to show you that, what it looks like when you don't do that also. So let me go ahead and get this in. Again, smooth cast onyx, fast. You have about 2.5 minutes. This thing will set up in maybe 10, 15 minutes, depending on mass. I got that in there. Look how black that is. It's beautiful. And I'm going to get my part A in here and combine these. You always want to scrape the sides and the bottom. And that's something that is always recommended no matter what you're doing. So here we go. Mixing this. I'm not trying to go nuts, right? Because I don't want to incorporate more air into this. If I was to really mix it like crazy, you would definitely incorporate more air bubbles. I mean, just mixing and pouring can get air bubbles, but I'm trying to not splash it. And I'm also trying to just make sure I don't add unnecessary bubbles. If you wanted to, like I said, you wanted to add colorant, you could do something like the So Strong, but why? You don't need to. This one actually, this material is interesting because it has a higher heat resistance. You do have to do a post-cure with heat. But if you had something where you were like needing a higher heat resistance, maybe you were doing a front door that you wanted to make look like metal, you could do something like our Task 8. That one has our highest heat resistance that you can have, and that would be what I would use for that. So here we go. I'm going to slowly pour right onto my little stick, and I'm just going to let it go around, seek its level on its own. I'm not going crazy, like moving around. We're not making brownies here. So pour that in, and we're good. If I see any bubbles on the back, which I don't see many, again, I get my little torch, make it all pretty, and we're good. So I would let this cure. Once it's cured, you'll be able to obviously demold it. I'm going to show you what that looks like right now. So let me make some space here for you. Ooh. And again, this sets up in maybe like 10, 15, depending on mass. All right, so flash forward, we're going to demold this guy. And what are we going to see? We are going to see something along these lines. So kind of boring, you know, just dull. This is our nickel silver. We still have to put a little bit of work into this to make it look actually like burnished and shiny. I was gonna show you this Jaguar, and this Jaguar piece has, if you can see it, do you see that little spot right here? It's like off-colored. That's where it was poured, and it was not poured onto a stick. And so that's one of those bald spots on this Jaguar that, that I wanted to show you. So that's something that could happen. And then look, the whole piece is messed up unless I just held it like this so that you would never see it, right? So can't really do that for everything, but just to give you an idea of why that's important when you're thinking about it. So I wanted to show you and talk a little bit about doing the burnishing. Some people call it polishing or buffing. So there's steel wool, right? So you would want to buy something like an extra fine or fine, depending on where you want to go. I use 000 or triple lot. That's my favorite. You could do quadruple. I mean, it's going to take you longer because it's more fine. If you go more coarse, like maybe 0 or 1 even, you risk the danger of buffing through too quickly. You could also see the coarseness could also give you lines, like striations, which actually could look cool depending on what your goals are. So that's something you could just pick up at the store. So I wanted to just show you how you could do that quickly. And so this is the one that's not buffed, and I'm going to buff this one. I'm not going to do the whole thing because it's going to take a minute. You will put a little elbow grease into this, a little bit of pressure, and it does take time. I have this ahead of time because it's going to make a little bit of a mess. We are now buffing it to get rid of, to basically bring out the shine of the metal underneath. So as I do this, try not to shake the table too much. Can you see it starting to shine up? I hope you can. You see the little shininess there? So imagine I kept doing this for another few minutes. Now, I'm kind of going slowly. I would probably put more pressure into this. You can also, if you want to, sometimes people will add a little bit of mineral spirits, just a really light amount of mineral spirits on top. What that does is softens the plastic slightly, and it makes it sometimes easier for you to burnish. That's up to you. I personally just don't need to add more chemicals, but again, it's up to whoever wants to do it, a little bit of mineral spirits. So if I kept going with this, if you can see it's starting to shine up, it would eventually start to look a little more like this. So this one is completely more shiny, if you can see that. And this was the original that I demolded. Kind of dull, guys. If you don't know and you pull it out and you think it's going to be all perfect, it's kind of disappointing, right? So you put a little bit of work into it and you get it to be definitely more shiny. So I just wanted to show you those options and the steel wool. You can also see like this little hot mess that I made. So that's why I have that little piece there. And I'm going to just gently move that away. Don't want to have that metal stuff everywhere. And I wanted to show you also some of the things that can go wrong and why the dusting thing is kind of cool, but also can cause problems. And also with the coloring. We talked about color a lot in the last 2 demos. If you buff too far through, whether it's a gel coat or whether it's just the dusting method, you can definitely go too far too quickly. And I was talking about, well, you want the color to kind of match, right? So just in case, if you go too far, and I want to show you these two, if you go too far, I used white on the back of these, no color, just white. You can definitely see I burnished way too far, and now it's super obvious this is not real metal, right? Looks terrible. It's harder to see on this one. This is aluminum, and this is bronze, but it's definitely more obvious that like this thing is not real, and the illusion, of our real metal casting is now gone. So keep that in mind. Try to match the color behind it. Be careful, decide what method you want, the gel coat or the dusting method. They both have different merits to it and timing and whatnot, but to me, this just can show you where it can go wrong. I also wanted to show you what happens if you buff too far or you put too much powder. So this crazy little clown, I purposely messed up. So there's all these little bubbles in here, air pockets, and see this nose? Nose looks terrible. It's normally supposed to be round. I added way too much powder on purpose. That means the resin can't reach that part of the mold. So it can't actually replicate the detail from the mold. Looks terrible. That would be hard to fix. These little bubbles here, I've done a little trick where I used a little bit of CA glue or cyanoacrylate glue, maybe a little bit of the powder. I've mixed that up, and in a pinch, I've tried to fix little areas like that. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on the texture of your piece if you can really make it work, but that's a little bit of a trick. On the side here, see the black? You're not supposed to see that. It just means I didn't put enough powder when I dusted it, but I did on purpose to show you why it's important to dust the whole thing evenly and thoroughly so that you don't ruin that illusion of the metal cold casting. I also wanted to show you, if you think that they're the same, they come with the same outcome, I want to just say there's subtle differences between gel coat and the dusting method. So this one right here is the gel coat. This one right here is the dusting method. So they're both shiny. They're both, looking like bronze, right? But this guy here, you can definitely tell it's shinier. I buffed them the same, but this one is actually the one that has the gel coat. Look how much shinier that is. Why? Well, first of all, it's a thicker layer, just a tiny bit thicker, but it also has more powder in it. This one, it's dusted, it has less powder. So yeah, I'm gonna get there and I can be like, okay, this is bronze, but depending on what level of metal that I really wanna bring out, I may choose the gel coat method because you get more of a realistic look. So I just wanted to show you guys the difference between those two methods and maybe why you might go one way versus another. All right, so those are the two, I would say 99.9% of the time, those are probably gonna be the ones that you guys choose for your methods. You don't have to just do castings though. I wanna show you some alternative methods so you can make metal parts. And I wanna show you actually our XTC-3D product. Many of you probably have heard of this product for a couple different things. It was developed for coating 3D prints. So why in the world am I using it now? Well, because I want to show you an alternative way to create that metal cold casting effect. So instead of casting, we're going to be actually kind of brushing it. And I wanted to show you two ways that you can do this. And it doesn't actually have to be just on a 3D print. I got these two here to show you. I think these are kind of like good small examples to show you. So what it is I have a 3D print, which is traditionally what our XTC-3D is applied to. Just a cute little mini column that I liked. I also have here a piece of decorative wood I just bought on Amazon. This is something that has a lot of detail, but maybe I wanted to use this ornamentation somewhere in a home. Maybe I want to make something custom, like we talked about that light cover or something like that. But I just wanted to show you, I think I bought like a pack of 5 of these, and I'm gonna say it was like $5, 10, maybe 7 something. It was so affordable. But now I'm gonna give this an upgrade by actually making it look like a real metal copper piece because it will have real metal in it. So I have these coated with a little bit of plastic because then the material is not going to stick to it and I can pull it off more easily. Otherwise, the XTC-3D epoxy coating would want to bond to it, and it's just a mess to try to get off. So the mix ratio on this material is 2:1 by volume. It's designed to be brushed. So for me, I'm not really trying to make it too much thicker, so I find that I get a really good result with only using a little bit of powder. So I don't even need to use a full 1:1 by volume or anything like that. I find that using a lot less still gets you the same results. I'm also going to use our UVO. So the UVO is, you can use it in urethanes, but these are the ones that we recommend for epoxies. So copper kind of is a brownish red, right? So that's kind of where I'm going with that. And you'll also see that I have here this little aluminum tray that I made ahead of time. The reason why is because I'm gonna mix this up and dump it in here, because when I mix this in here, that's in what I would call like a mass, and I wanna spread the mass out so I have more time. In a mass, I might barely have 10 minutes, maybe. It's gonna set up pretty quickly, but I wanna have enough time to coat these. And if I spread out the mass, I might even have around closer to 20 minutes, depending. So that's just gonna help me be able to have a little bit more time. So I'm gonna show you quickly how to do that, and then I'm gonna show you what the outcome is. Interestingly enough, just 1 ounce of this XTC-3D can actually cover over 100 square feet, which is kind of amazing. Obviously, that's really, really, really thin. I believe that's something like 1/64 of an inch, but that actually tells you just how thinly it should be applied. If you over apply it, you're gonna see it pooling. You're gonna see it dripping a lot. Even though it's meant to be brushable, doesn't mean that it can't drip a little, right? So I'm gonna add a little bit of colorant in here. I mean, not too much. I mean, I don't really need that much. Just gonna add a small amount. And again, this is our UVO, which is compatible with the epoxy. So I haven't had my timing start. I'm just mixing this together. And I think that looks kind of close, right guys? It's kind of close. hopefully this is giving you some alternative ideas to making things. You don't always have to do a casting to get a metal cold casting effect. You can still do a coating and get that. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do my part B into it. This is gonna just give me more liquid to put the powder into, and I'm going to throw that out and add my copper powder. Like I said, I don't really put that much powder in. You can kind of guesstimate what you need. I might even do less than half of the total volume, just because this stuff's already made to be thick. So this stuff, I'm going to scrape the sides and scrape the bottoms, making sure I can feel the metal in here. I want to make sure that I keep that metal moving, because the metal will have a tendency to sink to the bottom, just because everybody knows metal's heavy, it's going to sink down. So when you're doing your project, if you want to add a little bit more or a little bit less metal, that's totally up to you. I like to do with this one, because I have a lot more time, I like to do a double mix. This is a really good way for you to ensure that you have enough time. Sometimes with the other ones that I only have 2.5 minutes with, I just make sure that my mix is like supreme instead of doing a double mix, because I just don't feel like I have enough time. But when you have the time for it, you definitely should do a double mix and pour like we're doing here. So I'm mixing it. And some people will apply this with like a foam brush. For this application, there's some detail that I want to get into, so I'm going to use a regular disposable chip brush, just so that you can see that. All right, so now I could leave it in this cup, but sometimes what happens is in the mass, it sets up more quickly than I want. So I'm going to slowly pour this in here. Now you can effectively see it spreading the mass out. And what that does is it affords me more time, which is what I want, so that I can coat these. While I'm coating these, you might see it pooling in an area, and that's okay. You'll still have time to move it around. So I just gently get this on here, try not to drip too much. And I like to stipple it in. Look guys, this is like crazy thin. Like, this is super easy to do. I'm just stippling it on. If you notice that you missed a spot, that's fine, just go back. If it's dripping a little bit too much, or maybe sometimes people want to do 2 layers, you can definitely do 2 really thin layers. That's not a bad thing. You could do that rather than one gigando, like thick layer that's going to pool. You can totally do 2 layers. It's the same when you do the gel coat in your molds. If you feel like you missed a spot, sometimes people are doing like really big molds, where they're doing a gel coat. They might have several people helping, or they might just do multiple applications. You can totally do that. There's definitely times where we've all seen those spots where we missed them. Just mix up a little bit more and apply it, and you should be okay. So,
Heather, I am going to interrupt you quick with a question from chat.
Go for it.
If you wanted to use this, if you want to display that piece that you just worked on,
this guy?
Yeah. Like exterior, outdoors.
Yeah.
Is there anything you would do, or how would you prep that for like exterior display?
Okay, so the question is, what if, I talked about maybe putting this ornamentally indoors. What if you wanted to put it outdoors? That is an option. Later in the demo, I am going to talk a little bit about how you can protect and seal some of these pieces. A lot of times you will want to think about, as part of your project goals, not just the material in terms of the metal and all that, but where's this going to be? Is anyone handling it, et cetera? Especially when things are outdoors, depending on the material, you could seal this. Once you've polished it to the look that you really like, you could basically then use something like an acrylic sealer. Sometimes people will also use waxes and things like that. So that'd be something that you could do. I will talk about that a little bit later as well when we talk about some of the post-finishing. But yeah, it could be outside. You also have to think about what's under the metal, right? So if you use something that is a low heat deflection temperature, it may soften in a high heat. You really have to think, well, I already made this, but now I want to put it outdoors. It might be too late. You might have to remake it with a material that has a higher heat deflection temperature to withstand sunlight and heat and things like that. So guys, look how quickly I did this. I mean, I'm pretty much done. I coated 2 of these. I probably could have coated 2 more. The areas that I touch with my hand, that's totally fine. I usually will come back and I'll chase these, like I'll come around and I'll look, like, does it look like I missed a spot? I will normally like pick it up, and you can kind of see that gets everywhere, which is why I coated these, so then I'll be able to pop it up. When this is fully cured, you can actually, it's like basically resin, right? So you can take it to a belt sander, or you can smooth it out, like if you want it to be completely flat, if some of it got underneath. That happened to me. And you can do something like that because it's basically a plastic. Again, wear all your safety gear and stuff like that, but just how quickly and easily this is gonna give you that metallic look. So I am going to reserve this, or put this over here, and I'm gonna move these out of the way just so that you can see some of the castings. I'm gonna change my gloves too because it's a mess. But definitely an alternative in terms of just pouring castings. You can totally brush this onto surfaces. And again, this is wooden, literally just a piece of wood. This is a PLA 3D print. I've also got a piece that my colleague did on a piece of craft foam. Again, it's gonna strengthen the foam, just so that you can see this is the XTC-3D with metal on a piece of craft foam. The biggest thing about that is that don't like bend it too much because it's a thin layer and it could crack, but this is actually metal with XTC-3D in it on a piece of craft foam. So again, maybe a lightweight armor, something like that, whatever you wanna do. But we're talking about soft, flexible things. I would just be careful with that, depending on where you're going with it. So let me go ahead and move this out of the way. I'm gonna pick that up. And I wanna show you what it looks like once it's done. And like I said, you can go back and do more than one coat if that's what you're into. Some pieces are bigger and the material is just gonna set up before you're ready. You just can't help that. So you will probably want to, depending on your size, mix up just enough that you can apply and then move forward from there. Again, doing multiple layers is no big deal. You're fine with that. So once it's fully cured, you're gonna be seeing something like this. So it went from a piece of wood to a polished piece. And again, using a little bit of steel wool, you can get there. So I'll show you real quickly. If you want to see a little how quick this can be done, I'll show you this one. This is when it's fully cured, this is what it's gonna look like. So it's kind of just like a glossy thing, and it doesn't really, like if you told me that was metallic, I'd be like, oh, okay, is it? It doesn't really look metallic. So I'm gonna use my steel wool, and with the steel wool, you're gonna be able to see that I can quickly buff this. And again, I'm not gonna go too crazy, but I'm pressing onto it, I'm putting a little bit of my body weight into it and my hand strength. And I'm just gently using my 000 steel wool, kind of a fine or very fine steel wool, and you can start to see that it's starting to get shiny already. I'll try to do this on the side for you so you can see it. And you can hopefully see that this is very quickly and easily. This is just one layer. I could have come back and done a second coat, but I just wanted you to see what is possible with just one layer. I would just sit here and do this until I felt like it looked amazing. What I would then do is decide, do I want to post-finish it, or like we were talking about sealing it, what do I want to do? If this was just sitting like in my office, I'd probably just be like, okay, this looks cool right here. If I was going outside, I'd probably want to put some kind of protective seal coat on it, just to protect it from the elements. So again, I use this little piece of paper because we're going to get a little bit of plastic and a little bit of the steel wool. It's going to make a mess. Move it forward, and so it goes from this plasticky looking thing to this, which is our copper piece. So the copper piece here, you can see it's more metallic-y looking, and then this is just basically a shiny piece of plastic. So this was, again, just one layer. Let's see if I can shine it in the light for you. And also, this was what this looked like. So this went from a piece of wood to the shiny copper decorative piece. So really quickly and easily, I just achieved something that looked expensive. It's still lightweight, but now, I mean, I could just go on online and sell that somewhere, or someone would be in my house and be like, oh, that's so nice, when was this house made? And be like, I made that, pretty much. So just depends on where you want to go with it, but copper is just one way. You could totally use a combination of metals, or again, you could make this purple if you wanted, decide what colors you want beneath it. So that's just something cool that you can do. Another thing beyond the gel coat, beyond the dusting in, and beyond something like this, like brushing it onto a surface, is something called slush casting. And if anyone's familiar with that, it's literally slushing the mixture around in a mold. Sometimes you'll hear of rotocasting or rotational casting. The rotational casting, you're literally rotating it. Sometimes it's done by hand, sometimes it's done by a machine. I decided to show you the slush casting because I wanted you to be able to see what it looks like. Well, kind of like what's happening inside if you were doing a rotocasting for the most part. So what I'm showing you now is just an open face mold. And this open face mold is a life casting. It's actually me. The life casting is something that's very, very, very popular when it comes to metal cold casting. It's super popular. So popular that people want to do big life-size pieces, stuff like this. I mean, this is huge. This takes a hot minute to do, but you can get there. You can do a hand, you can do a full torso. People do pregnancy bellies, that's super popular. It really just depends on honestly, your goals. But we're gonna just do a little bit of a face. Actually, I've seen a bunch of people buy like famous actors or famous singers, and they like to have the life castings because it's kind of cool. I actually knew a guy who had mentioned that he was selling, I want to say they were life castings of famous guitarists, and they were acting as a hook for their guitars, which I thought that was really cool if you're really into that. So really creative ways that you can use our materials to get that metal cold casting effect. So this is a life casting silicone called Body Double. There's a video on how to do life castings like this on our website. There's lots of them actually, but these particular type of life castings are often done with a skin-safe material like the Body Double. Again, it's a silicone mold. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna show you how I do the slush casting effect. Now, I could sit here and brush that in. I mean, that would not be out of the ordinary if I just brushed it in. But I want to give you the idea of how some people prefer to slush cast, and you're slushing it around. This slushing motion is kind of what you're going to see going on inside of a rotational casted mold, roto or rotational casted mold, where it's moving 360 degrees on all axes. So I'm using brown, So Strong. This is compatible with our urethanes because I'm using bronze. Bronze also looks good with black, but I'm just in particular want to change it up and use a little bit of brown here. So I'm going to put in my part B into this mixing cup. Boop. Add my little bit of colorant in there. Okay, get in there. And squish. Put that over here. And then I'm going to add my part A. So a couple things that can be done. I could have pre-mixed my B with the colorant. I could put the powder in first. There's a lot of ways. I want to show you some versatility on what you can do. As you get better and gain experience, you might find one works better for you than the other. I've definitely had, I would call them learning experiences, where my material set up on me before I was ready. I mean, it happens. We've all, burned something while we were cooking, right? Same idea. But it's something where you might find a way that works better for you. So for me, I wanted to show you that you can do it this way. One reason that I like to combine my A and my B first sometimes before I add the powder is because it gives me, like I said, more of that liquid because the powder is going to thicken it. It also starts my timer off. So I'm not going to be sitting here slushing for that much longer because I want to, just like with the gel coat, I'm going to keep this moving as long as I can before it starts to set up and cure on me. The best thing that you can do is practice this on a smaller scale till you feel confident with it. And like I said, I'm going to mix this up and I'm going to get it in here. Again, by either brushing it in, doing the gel coat, or by doing this, just like with the epoxy, by spreading it out, I'm lowering the mass. So the volume has been spread out. So I'm going to dump this in here and get it all in. Throw that out. Boom. And I'm going to pick this up and just show you how I do the slushing. I'm moving gently. I'm going to try not to spill it, guys. I'm moving it around evenly. I want the metal to be moving. So I'm sitting here actually trying to move the resin and metal mixture. I use the 325 with this again. This is the same material that I used at the beginning with the gel coat. That's just, to me, like I said, one of the most common materials that you'll use for this because it sets up quickly. You want to use something that sets up fairly quickly, because if you use something that sets up in a long pot life and a long cure time, that gives more time for the metal to come out of suspension. All that means is that it sinks. Sometimes I've even played around with stuff that has ultra long cure times, and it didn't really cure. I had some issues with that. So just be careful, because that is a possibility, because the material sitting at the bottom doesn't have the same amount of material at the top, because all the metal's at the bottom sometimes if it takes too long to cure. So this is really nice because it cures pretty quickly. So you can see here, I'm keeping it moving, guys. If I just were to stop, you can see it just sits, right? Maybe that's okay. Some people might be okay with it, but then I have this giant glob in the middle. So what I want to do is I want an even coat. Some people will do multiple thin coats. Sometimes people do this not with metal powder, but they might do it with a different resin. We do have some videos on our website. Again, my colleague Milo did a couple, and a couple other people have done them, where they do videos and even YouTube lives about roto casting, if you want to get some of those awesome tips and tricks from some of our team here. To me, the biggest takeaway from learning roto casting is practice. Because if you're not comfortable with moving your body in a certain way, or your hands, you could spill this, or which you just start all over. But it's money, every time you do that. So hopefully you can see that this is starting to thicken up. It's moving more slowly as I do this. In the end, I am going to let it set in the middle. And one reason I have this container is because I knew ahead of time I would want it to sit in a certain specific way, so that it would cure without tipping over. So you can kind of see it's going to stop, and then once it starts to really pull, I'm going to let it just stop. So I'll put this here, and this will sit here. I'll let that cure. So what's going to happen next is flash forward, right? So here we are with our bronze piece. We flashed forward. This purple is another body double. So we have body double standard and body double fast. So it was really just one of the molds that I had two of, which happens to be my face. So that's why I just decided to use it. But again, life castings are super popular and reusable. So with this particular material, you saw me do the backfill, and I did the backfill with just more resin. I want to give you a lightweight option that maybe you haven't heard of. Maybe you have. It's called Freeform Air. This is an epoxy putty that is extremely lightweight, hence the name, right? What'll happen is I'm going to mix my A and my B together, and it's going to, obviously it's going to be a chemical reaction. When they're together, maybe in about I would say like a ½ inch in thickness, I have about maybe 30 minutes to work with it. The thinner you go, the more time you actually have to work with this. Full cure is 24 hours. So a little bit more time, but the advantage of doing this, and this is 1A to 1B by volume, the advantage is this is very lightweight. I could just keep building up layers and whatnot, but if I pour more material in there, I would just be doing slushing, or brushing. That's fine, but this is actually gonna be a little bit lighter. And so what I'm doing is I'm trying to mix this and get a uniform color so that there's no streaks. This also, depending on what you're doing, you can do this. You can add a little bit of fiberglass behind it if you wanted to, and then do a little bit of our liquid epoxy to make it even stronger. But honestly, for this, I don't really feel like I need a lot, in terms of strength, because it's so small. But if I was doing a big torso like that, that was heavy that I showed you, I might want to add a little more reinforcement to the weight. Because of the weight of the resin. So this is a very affordable, lightweight way to do it. This has a really satisfying mix feel. Like if anyone's ever used Freeform Air, I think that you'll agree with me that it feels really nice when you mix it. Some people will use this to sculpt. I even have one of my colleagues, I can show you later, Janessa showed me some pieces that she made and that she actually mixed the metal powder into this. It was really interesting. The hard part about it is when you press that into a mold, sometimes the detail is lost because you can see this dough is not liquidy, right? It may not flow into all the detail areas. But it's an interesting option. I've also seen her mix some into our Freeform Sculpt, which is interesting. Those are both epoxies. Obviously this Freeform Air and the Freeform Sculpt. So I've seen her do some sculptures with that. So to me, I think I got this pretty equal. So this is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna put this up here, And I like to do the edges first. I'm gonna show you how to do it. So what I'll do is I'll roll this out into like a thin, I don't know, kind of like a hot dog, if you will. I'll roll this out kind of thinly. And what I'll do is I'll go right up to the edge and I'll press it in. When I press this in, you can see that it looks like kind of messy. Like you see like the glove marks and all that. I'm gonna show you how to smooth that out afterwards. Again, just another little kind of like long hot dog shape. I'm gonna go up to the edge and just do this. I'm pressing it onto the surface. This epoxy, you know, obviously you know there's epoxy adhesives, so this stuff sticks really well to the urethane resin. So I'm gonna mix up a little bit more. And you can kind of see, just in this little conversation we're having, in this little demo, I'm almost done with this. It's pretty quick and easy. If I was gonna do another layer that I slushed in, that's gonna be another few minutes, and probably do another layer to slush it. It's gonna just take more time. Again, not the end of the world, but you know, when you're thinking about faster, easier, you know, what your goals are, these are things that you can consider in terms of timing and whatnot. So now I'm just gonna fill in the area in here that is, I'm gonna try to make it uniform, but I'm gonna fill in the area that's not covered. And you can kind of see this looks a little lumpy. No fear, I will show you how this will work out in the end. So I'm gonna press these in. I'm trying to make this almost like hollow. This is gonna be extremely lightweight, but it's gonna have the strength because of this freeform air behind it. If I didn't have the freeform air behind it, it might be a little too brittle, depending on how you're using it. So it's definitely something to consider in terms of how you'll handle your piece. You just don't want pieces all breaking off and stuff like that. So we fill in some gaps that I see. Did I miss anything else? I think that's good. So, I mean, you could technically just leave it like this if you wanted, but I'm gonna show you how to smooth that out. I also want to just give you a little bit of a tip if you want. You could just get like a paper clip, something simple, bend that out if you wanted to, and honestly, like just embed that right in here. If you were to embed this in here, you would have basically a picture hook. I would have to clip that, of course, but you would, once this cures, this metal piece would actually be embedded in this freeform air, and you have, boom, your own little hook. So you don't even have to worry about that later. That's just an idea. One of my colleagues actually did that with this piece, and Milo made this piece. Look how big this is, but look, I'm so strong. This is freeform air on the back, and you can kind of see he embedded the hook as well. So there's definitely things that you can do. Beautiful piece, this is aluminum. But this is definitely something you can do. If I was doing a much bigger piece, I might need a stronger hook or things like that, but there's so many options that you can do with these castings to make it easier for you to handle. So what I'll do now, I'm gonna show you how I smooth that out. So like I said, at about 1.5 inches, I have maybe 30 minutes. This is not 1.5 inches. This is maybe 1/2 inch, maybe. It's not very high, very thick at all. So I might even have even more than 30 minutes. I might even have closer to 45 minutes to an hour. I get a little bit of, this is isopropyl alcohol, and I love these pumps. So disposable chip brush, and notice I'm not overloading it, but I'm just, if you can see this, I am just smoothing it out. So this doesn't mess with the cure at all. I mean, I'm not gonna like immerse this in isopropyl, but this is just a way that it kind of cleans up your work, makes it look more professional and intentional. And I like it like this because it makes it look smoother and nicer. So as I go through this, I'm just gonna keep brushing. I can keep adding more and more water as isopropyl as I go. You could actually, you know, technically I guess you could use water if you wanted to. I think the isopropyl works a little bit better, because sometimes this putty tends to be a little adhesive. So I feel like the isopropyl just, for me, tends to work a little bit better when I use it. But you can kind of see, I'm also pressing on this. So I'm actually even making it bond a little bit better, and I'm also making it more uniform by pressing it all into one shape. So look how quickly and easily we just did this backfill. We've done a couple different types of backfills, but this is going to be one of the lighter weight ones. There are other things that you can do to have lighter, even lighter weight if you wanted to, or similar in lightweight, and I'm gonna show you some of those as we're going along next. So this is done here. I would let that cure. It's 24 hours. I'm going to move this to the side, and I'm going to show you what that looks like fully cured. Oof, a lot of powder there. So let me move this isopropyl just a little bit out of the way. And wanted to show you what this looks like. So when it comes out, it kind of looks dull and sad, right? So you've got this bronze look. Again, it's not polished at all. It's kind of just dull. And then we have here this look right here. So this one is definitely the polished or burnished one. So you can see, I'm trying to move it so you can see the metallic look in the light versus just this kind of dull brown one. You see the back here. These have been smoothed again with the isopropyl, so they have that more finished look. And again, you could put a little bit of a hook in there if you wanted and let it cure right in there. The option's up to you. But life castings are super popular. It could be like a little baby, you know, a little baby foot, little baby hand. Super popular. People love those.
So Heather, I'm going to interrupt you real quick with a request from chat. Since we haven't seen any live demolds, and the question was, is it any different demolding with the metal surface or anything weird about the demolding? The relief that you did the backfill of should probably be cured. Can you just do like a live demold?
Let me take a look. So when you're working with the Smoothcast 325, so the question was they wanted to see a live demold. That's fine. When you work with the Smoothcast 325, so it normally sets up in a mass, probably in maybe 15 minutes or so. In a thinner mass, I would say 1/4 inch or less sometimes, they stay semi-rigid longer than some of our other materials. So what you might notice is the material might look a little semi-rigid. Eventually it's hard as a rock, but it's a unique quality to our 325 series. So let's see if I can demold this. So this was This was our brass piece from the beginning. So that's what this guy is. So I got it here, and I'll show you how to demold it. So I would consider it normal, honestly. I just kind of pull it out, and here it is. So if you want to see that piece, cleanup-wise, this could be plain resin, or this could be metallic, you know, like this. I just peel these off. These are my edges. It comes off really easily because it's so thin. And then I make sure there's nothing left in my mold, and I can move forward. So that was our live demold.
Excellent.
So pretty easy. Nothing crazy. And I'm going to go ahead and get that out of the way. Hopefully that helps show you. It's honestly almost like any other demold. So it's not crazy exciting, but it's something you know, worth showing you guys. The next thing I want to talk about, since we were talking a little bit about like backfill options or ways that you can maybe not just pour resin into the back, which is, I would say, the most common way, I want to talk about the backfills. So when I was telling you about, like, you know, hey, what about, you know, if you don't put any backfill in? Well, it can be brittle. So this is just the resin, a couple layers of resin, but I hate to do this, but you see how it's like breaking? It's kind of brittle. Like, this is a reason why you kind of want your edges in all your pieces to have a little bit more oomph behind them, a little bit of backfill, because the edges are especially the weakest compared to where the material will settle in the middle. It just makes your piece more easy to handle, but that's one reason why we want to make sure our backfill is pretty secure. So just wanted to show you that brittleness piece. The other thing I wanted to show you in terms of backfill are some examples. So if I wanted to go even lighter in weight, you know, we showed you, you just saw me demold that piece, but this is resin, right? So this is a resin backfill. So I demolded that piece, that's bronze, and we did a contrasting color so you could see. This is just regular old plastic or resin, if you want to call it that. That's probably your most common. It feels pretty heavy. Here's another one. This is a really beautiful column ruin. It feels, I mean, it's kind of heavy, but honestly, it's really light. Why? Because it's backfilled with urethane expanding foam, our Foamit series. You could use something like Foamit 3, Foamit 5, one of the lighter ones. It's perfectly flat for a couple reasons. You can take it to a belt sander when it's fully cured and make it perfectly flush. You can also check out the videos on our website where we talk about backfilling and using back pressure. And that'll show you how to do it if you want to get a really, really nice flush uniform cell structure using our expanding urethane rigid foams. Another option is using, and I'm not sure if everyone wants to go this route, but these are fiberglass. So fiberglass, there's a million different ones, but just to show you, there's fiberglass chopped, they're like little pieces, and then there's matte, and it's kind of in a mat, and you would mix that and kind of like press that into the resin. Sometimes people like that because that makes it really, really strong and still lightweight. So I wanted to show you in terms of backfill options. We've been talking a lot about lightweight stuff, right? Freeform air, the foam. So this is some of the chopped put in here, and oh look, we have a little bit of a handle built right in, so that was done afterwards, right? This is the same thing. This is actually our Duomatrix Neo piece, which is actually pretty cool, but it has this chopped glass, but then it was covered and kind of concealed so that these can be sharp, so this kind of makes it less sharp and also conceals some of that. So these are just options in terms of lightweight pieces that are metallic. I'm gonna show you when people want to make stuff actually heavy and actually mimic the weight of solid metal, because let's face it, sometimes we don't want it to be light. There is a certain satisfaction when you pick up that metal piece and it's like, this feels like heavy and it feels like real metal. There is a satisfaction. It's like when you pick up that coin and it feels heavy, it's really nice. So I'm gonna show you a way that you can get that heavy feeling. Some people, if you wanna go the route of using something like lead shot, or I've seen people use nuts and bolts. You'll have your gel coat, and then you put in some heavy things, like we were talking about the like lead shot, or literally nuts and bolts, because that makes it heavy. And then you kind of cover that with a little bit of resin, and no one knows it's in there. And that adds a little bit of weight. The resin itself, if you backfill with resin, is gonna feel a certain weight to it as well. One more thing that we offer at Smooth On is actually, it's called URE-FIL 17. We have a lot of URE-FIL products. They're mostly fillers that you're gonna add to different materials, but this particular one is very interesting. So, especially for this application. So the URE-FIL 17, it's basically, I look at them as like, I think they look like tiny little teardrops, but they're basically aluminum pellets. And I have a little bit of a graphic to show you just how tiny they are. So this is an American penny. Look at these little guys. They're tiny. However, they are real aluminum and they're heavy. So that makes them ideal for what we're doing because it adds a lot of weight and it adds even weight, which is nice. We have another one. It's called URE-FIL 19. The 19 is a little bit bigger. These are 400 micron. The 19 is a larger size. Those are fine, but the reason I use this is because they're so small, they'll get into all the detail. Like if I have an intricate piece, it'll help get into detail. And I feel like they just compact a little bit more. Just for me, that's why I like them the best. But these are awesome, and these are aluminum. So I did this with our aluminum powder. So in order to save time, because you've seen me do a lot of gel coats or face coats, I already did the aluminum powder, mixed it with a little bit of black. You don't have to. Sometimes I like aluminum with white. It's up to you. But what I have is our URE-FIL 17, those tiny little cute pellets. So the mix ratio, in order to make this work and make it heavy, is 1 part A by volume, 1 part B by volume, and that's our Smoothcast 325. And then I have 2 parts by volume of the pellets, or the URE-FIL 17. The way this works the best in order to saturate everything is I'm going to put these pellets into their own container. Even though they're like actual metal pellets, they're kind of like clingy by static. So keep that in mind, that they can like cling to stuff. I'm gonna put these in here first. We have some demonstrations on our website of different applications for this because you can do some really cool stuff. But this is just one way to add actual real weight. You're gonna trick people. They're gonna think this is like real metal. So this right here, I weighed it. It's actually 1 pound. So I'm actually adding 1 whole pound to this little thing. If you're thinking like, well, what's a pound? It doesn't sound like much. Think of like that big old peanut butter jar. I mean, that's a pound. You know, it depends on what you're doing. I also have some metal powder in the front of this, and I have the weight of the resin. So I'm already probably adding maybe not a full 2 pounds, but probably it could be close to it. This right here, this is probably at least a little over maybe a half a pound-ish. So this is gonna feel significantly different than a piece of plastic. But just this small amount here is a pound, which is incredible. Depending on, if you remember from earlier, let me show you this. This is a pound of bronze powder. So, and this is not 100% full, but it's close. But this is a pound of bronze powder. I mean, this is kind of small. So just think about that real metal weight that's being added to this. So if you want to simulate solid metal, this is probably one of your best options. I'm going to show you how to do that. So I'm going to have my A and my B, and I'm going to mix them first before I pour them in here. So I'm going to add a little bit of black, because that's what I did to my aluminum powder here. Notice there's no aluminum powder in the backfill. All our money is in the front. All that aluminum powder is in the front. Nobody cares what's behind it in terms of the metal, because you won't see it. So no big whoop. I'm going to add that in here and mix that up. This is, again, our Smoothcast 325, 1 part A to 1 part B by volume. Going to mix this in here. And then I'm going to pour this into our pellets. So I'm going to mix this together, make sure it's thoroughly incorporated, scraping the sides and the bottoms. I always use a flat bottom and flat side stick, and I try to use containers that have flat sides and bottoms. That makes sure that you get a good mix ratio and a thorough mix, because if you kind of let's say you kind of hold it up and you're not really touching the bottom or something, you may not thoroughly mix that. If you're not scraping the sides as well as the bottoms, you're missing out on material being 100% homogeneous. So that's something that you want to consider. So I'm mixing here, scraping the bottoms, scraping my sides. This, again, has about 2.5 minutes pot life. Now I'm going to pour it into my URE-FIL 17. All right. Scrape as much as I can out. Whoop. Bonk. So I'm going to slowly try to get this to incorporate in here. I'm going to hold that, see if I can get this to work. And they're kind of like this light aluminum color, and then they get darker, and that's okay. As I mix it in, I actually did a couple castings where I didn't have a gel coat. I wanted to see the pellets on their own, and you can get some very interesting appearances. It's not a cold cast metal effect, but you can use these pellets to make some really artistic effects where you see the detail of the pellets in the casting if you use a clear resin, and I think that actually looks kind of cool. So I got them mixed in here, and I'm going to go ahead and pour. Oops. All right, I'm going to go ahead and pour. All right. I'm getting all that in there. Clunk. Look at all that. All right. So now this is going to cure up. See some bubbles. Pop some of those bubbles to make it look nice and pretty. And should be good to go. So what I'll do now is I'm going to show you what this looks like once it's fully cured. I'm going to kind of try to move this gently. Show you what that looks like cured. I feel like I'm busting a table over here. So fully cured, make sure I don't have any residue on me, is this guy, or girl, right? And there's 2 different versions that I want to show you. So I've got this one that demolded, right? This is what you would see as demolded, not polished. Notice that these are a little bit different. One's a little darker, one's a little lighter. So this is just glossy because the mold's glossy, but it's not burnished yet. These guys here, I added a little bit more black to the 325. I added a little less black to the 325. It can get me varying degrees of what I want my aluminum powder to look like. So if I like that lighter look, great. If I want a little bit more dark look, to me it's aluminum, but it almost looks gunmetal, kind of cute, that I can have options. We talked about it a couple times, how much colorant you add and what colors you add can really change up how things look. So just to give you some ideas of where this could go. So the last section of this that I wanted to go over with you guys, and again, these are heavy because they have the URE-FIL 17 in them. The last section that I wanted to go over with you guys to round this out is our post-finishing effects. So the post-finishing effects, I mean, you could go on and on and on about that. There's so many things you could do. Probably, if I was going to talk about maybe the most popular finishing effect, it would be like what we call like a patina, right? So there's natural patina, which is like a natural oxidation. So the most famous patina that I think everybody knows is Statue of Liberty. So she started out, as you'll see on this graphic, she started out copper, right? And you saw from earlier, copper is more of that reddish, right? Reddishy. And then over time, due to weathering and due to some of the chemicals that were present in the environment, she turned to that beautiful verdigris, or that kind of like greenish blue. That's probably what you've been familiar with in terms of, like if I was going to talk to you about post-finishing and patina. That just happened naturally because of the location and all that kind of stuff, like location, temperature, humidity, salts in the air, pollution, who knows, and time. Patina naturally does take time. It can take literally years or decades, depending. So that would be a post-finishing option if you had a lot of time, right? If you don't have a lot of time, and I'll show you some examples of some patinas, if you don't have a lot of time, you might want to force it, right? You might want to speed that up by doing a chemical patina. Smooth On doesn't really sell chemical patinas, but you can go online and you can actually find a lot of different recipes involving stuff even that you have at your home. You can buy pre-made chemicals online. There's a couple places like Surefin Chemical. There's also Sculpt Nouveau. They make really cool patina effects and sealers and all that kind of stuff that will go with this type of application. But this is just something that you could do if you decided to go this route. Some people just like everything nice and pretty and shiny, and they'll seal it with something like a Krylon Crystal Clear acrylic spray and be done with it. They like it to look pristine. Some people like the aged look. You might even, instead of the crystal clear acrylic spray, you might even do a wax. That's popular. I just wanted to show you some options in terms of patinas. Now, let's say you're like, I'm done with chemicals, I don't really want to go that route, and I don't have 30 years. Okay, that's fine. You can actually do a faux patina. You can use something like acrylic paints, and you can just paint something on. Like, so this was like a faux, patina. You could totally do that as well. It really honestly depends on you. You're going to get different appearances depending on what you want to do. This one right here has the patina on one side, and this side was waxed. This is actually a Matrix Drive product, so which is a polymer modified gypsum. This one, I actually talked to a friend that I met years ago, and he shared this with me. He used Miracle Grow and some other things. And so it's basically what's coming in contact. Sometimes people use ammonia and all. Some people use salts, vinegar, I mean, you name it. Go online if you want to learn more about patinas and see if you can find some recipes there, because you can go nuts with it. And it also depends on, do you wait a day or do you wait a week? It's really cool, the places that you can go with it. Here's a life casting that was purposely patinaed to look aged. Think about in movies, someone's in a graveyard. What do we always see at these graveyards in these like thriller movies or haunted movies? Stuff's always looking aged, right? Sometimes the movie company doesn't have time to age it, so they'll do something either faux or they'll chemically accelerate that. So I just wanted to show you guys some ideas there. And I want to show you finally, as my last demo, something really quick that you can do in order to give your the appearance of a little bit of depth and bring out some of the appearance of the depth and detail of your pieces. So that would be using something as simple as a colored wax. So a colored wax, you might also know that as shoe polish. So I'm going to show you a couple ways that you can do that quick effect in order to get something to look really cool, really quickly, and you don't have to deal with any special chemicals or anything like that. You can buy colored waxes that are specifically for this type of application, but you don't have to. So I made a bronze piece and I made an aluminum piece, just so that you could see these. So this is them raw, right? So this is them raw right out of the mold. So nothing's been done, they haven't been polished, anything. They're just kind of there. What you can do is you could just polish it up and be happy with it and you're done. Sometimes people might use a little bit of sonite wax. Min wax is another one that people will use. You apply a thin layer, you let it dry, and then you use a soft cloth and you buff it up. Some people like the matte look, some people like the shiny look. It's up to you. Depending on if it's indoors or outdoors, there's a lot of guides online that show you how to maintain stuff, but usually you want to make sure it's cleaned and properly and that you reapply it every so often. Sometimes people don't want to deal with waxes and they just like to put something, like I said, that like an acrylic spray. It could be matte, gloss, satin. It's really up to you, but it's pretty simple. If I was going to burnish this, I would again use my steel wool. So burnish this, and I get it to this level. So now I'm here, right? So we've got these raw out of the mold. Now I'm to this level that I burnish these. So raw, and I burnish these, and now these are ready for me to show you this quick shoe polish trick. So shoe polish is basically a colored wax. I think, for me personally, I love the black. It depends on everyone else, but I think black looks really good. You could use brown. I tried purple, it didn't look good. I'm gonna use a little bit of my isopropyl alcohol, and I'm wetting my shoe polish so that you can see what I'm doing. I don't want it like too wet, but just enough to get it to flow in. All I'm doing is deciding where I want this to be. For me personally, I want it to fill in some of these like kind of boring areas that don't have detail. So for me, I'm going in these edges, and I'll just do half so you can kind of see. And you have to give this time to dry before you move forward. And what I would do is flash forward. I would let this dry. It could take 30 minutes, it could take an hour, it just depends on how much you add. If you have clumps, I would remove the clumps because they're just gonna be like soft, thick pieces that are gonna be annoying when you try to polish or not polish, depending on what you want. I use a chip brush. I personally find that the chip brush gets in there a little bit better, and I can press it in and stipple it almost. So flash forward, let's pretend that we got our things completely dry. And I just want to show you what I did here. And so we got this is the burnished part, and so this is just a look that I liked, which is, I like the matte look. You could buff it up if you want. What I did is I got a little bit of a soft cloth. You could also, in a pinch, use something like this, paper, and you would just wipe off the high points if that's what you want. When you wipe off the high points, it kind of accentuates those low points. This could be done on jewelry. This could be done on whatever you wanted to do that was metal cold cast. And if I'm like, whoops, I took off a little bit more, no big whoop. I'll come in here and I'll just put more. It's fine. You let it dry and you come back and you're good to go. So again, these are the ones that I finished and let fully dry. At this point, if I wanted to, I could take like a little buffing brush if I wanted, or a towel that's lint-free and soft, and buff it. I like how matte they look. To me, it's still metallic, but I think it looks cool. So just giving you guys options for things that you can do. It goes from this here, goes to this from this. So I think it's a significant change from just something that you pulled out of the mold to looking like it's got some really cool depth and you spent some time on it, while still being real metal and having some weight to it. So depending on where you want to go, hopefully today's presentation has given you a whole myriad of options for things that you can do with our products. You can pour gel coats, or brush gel coats, pour backfills. You can brush our materials onto 3D prints, onto pieces of wood. You can have a variety of backfills that are lightweight or purposely heavy. Honestly, it just kind of depends on you. Depending on where you want to go, or if you have a unique project, just give us a call. We'll be able to help you out in terms of questions. We have a toll-free support line for that. With that, I think I'm going to leave you and just let you know that we're going to have our next event, which is actually here at Smooth On, our concrete seminar, and that's going to be in November. Our seminars for 2024 are posted on our website as well as on our social media. So if you want to learn in person, this is something you can actually learn in person, and we'll do this with you here at our basic seminar. So there's definitely other ways that you can learn other than just this. So if you have any other questions, like I said, give us a call. But until the next one, I'll see you. Thanks for joining.